I sat on the wooden porch of the farm holding a coffee cup that had long gone cold. The wind blew across the cornfields in front of me, carrying the smell of soil and dry. Grass typical of rural Nebraska, Caleb, my husband, had left this morning to attend a fire training session in Omaha. He's a firefighter, and trips like these were nothing new to me after nearly a decade of marriage. But today, when his truck disapped down the dirt road, I felt a larger emptiness than usual spreading through my chest. Beside me, Buddy, the light yellow Labrador retriever, curled up on the wooden floor, his tail wagging at me every time I glanced at him. Buddy had been with us for 5 years, ever since Caleb brought him home from a nearby rescue shelter to me. He wasn't just a dog, he was a companion, always by my side whenever I faced the loneliness of this farm. I set my coffee cup down and leaned down to stroke his soft fur. Just two of us, Buddy, I whispered, and he responded with a low whine as I agreed with me. But tonight something felt strange in the air. I wasn't sure if it was the fiery sunset settling down or the way Buddy was looking at me. His large brown eyes lit up deep and full of meaning, as if trying to say something I hadn't quite understood. I stood up, intending to check on the chicken sepia buffer. It got too dark, but as I stepped down the porch steps, Buddy jumped up and followed behind, his paws gently brushing against my heel. I turned back and looked at him, and for a fleeting moment I felt like Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was a presence much closer than I had ever imagined. I shook my head, laughing at myself for such a silly thought. I walked out into the yard, Buddy trailing bend, his tail wagging in steady rhythm like a familiar beat. When I checked the chicken coop lock, he stood by my side looking up at me without taking his eyes off me. I sat down next to him, letting him nuzzle his head into my hand, and asked warmth from his body spread through my skin. I wondered if my loneliness was making perceive things differently. The days after Caleb left the farm, I felt the silence of Nebraska seeping into every breath. I took the wind blowing through the cornfields, the chickens clucking at the spot, all felt like a sad melody. I couldn't escape. Caleb texted every evening, as brief as always. "I'm fine, we'll be home this weekend," I replied with a few familiar words. But when night fell, I was left alone in the old wooden house with wall that echoed the loneliness I couldn't shake. Buddy becameth only light in those days. My Labrador retriever no longer just curled up on the porch like before. Now he was always near me, like a companion who never left me side. One afternoon, I sat on the wooden chair outside reading an old book I had abandoned long ago. Buddy jumped up, resting his head on my lap without waiting for an invitation. I smiled softly, putting the book down and stroking his soft yellow fur. The warmth from his body spread through my pants, and as I looked into his deep brown eyes, I felt a strange connection, not just ordinary affection, but something deeper, more intimate. The next day, I went to the horse barn to check the haystack. Buddy ran along, his tail wagging like a small fan in the wind. I bent down to tie Bailey, and Buddy suddenly nudged his cold wet nose into my hand. I looked up, meeting his gaze, not just curious, but with an earnestness that made my heart race. I patted his head, and Buddy pressed into me palm as if he wanted to merge with touch. The gesture confused me, but I didn't pull my hand back. I left it there, feeling the warmth from him spread through my fingers. That evening, I went into the kitchen to make a simple meal, just soup and bread. Buddy lay right by me feet, his eyes never leaving my every move. When I dropped a piece of bread, he quickly picked it up, holding it in his mouth before placing it back at my feet like a small gift. I bent down and stroked his cheek, and my hand inadvertently lingered on his muzzle all longer than usual. But he didn't pull away, but tilted his head, letting his warm breath wash over my hand like a soft breeze blowing through a summer field. I felt a strange warmth spread through me, not just comfort, but like an invisible thread pulling me closer to him. The closeness became more pronounced on time I sat on the porch floor playing with Buddy. By throwing a small stick, he ran off to fetch it and suddenly jumped up, placing his two front paws on my shoulder. His weight pushed my back gently in for a moment. His face was only a few inches from mine. Buddy's brown eyes stared directly into mine, sparkling under the sunset, and I could feel his breath warm and steady, like a living heartbeat. I laughed out loud, trying to push him away, but my hands trembled slightly as they touched his thick fur buddy. Let out a small whine, then lick at me cheek, his moist tongue, leaving a warm trail on my skin. I froze, unsure of what to do, but I didn't push him away right away. I let the feeling linger like amament I didn't want to end that night when I lay in bed in. The simple wooden room buddy jumped up and lay beside me thing he had never done when Cobb was home. I let him stay, feeling the warmth of his body spread through the blanket. Like a small fire keeping me warm on a cold night, he rested his head in. My hand, his eyes half closed as though he were dreaming, but still facing my, stroked his ear and whispered, "You're my best friend, buddy," but deep inside, a different feeling was rising, an attachment that went beyond what I had ever thought of a dog. Wondered if my loneliness was clouding my judgment, or if there was something deeper growing between us. I began to struggle with myself. I knew this feeling was abnormal, that Buddy was just a dog, that I shouldn't let my mind wander like this, but every time he was near, nuzzling his head into my lap or looking at me with those sincere eyes, I felt an odd pull I couldn't dismiss. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep in my heart, I wasn't sure I could stop it. Buddy and his innocence seemed to sense something too. He became even closer, not just the loyalty of a dog, but like a companion wanting to fill the emptiness inside me. The tension between us grew like a swirling wind pulling us, both and waiting for the day it would explode. The days passed since Caleb left the farm, and I felt like a dry field craving a rainstorm. I didn't dare name the loneliness in the wooden house, and the brass seeped into every breath I took, and Buddy, my loyal Labrador retriever, became with only light in that darkness. I no longer just saw him as a companion. Each touch, each look from him was like a gust off wind, stirring the emotional strings I had tried to bury deep. That night, a heavy rain poured down on the farm, roaring like the call of the heavens. Is that inside looking through the window, watching the drops slam into the cornfields? Buddy lay by my feet, his brown eyes shining, looking at me with a meaning I couldn't quite place. I stroked at his yellow fur, feeling his warmth spread through my hand like a small stream flowing over dry stones. But tonight his gaze wasn't just sincere, it was like a wordless invitation pulling me into a place I wasn't sure I should step toward. I stood up, deciding to check the horse barn for leaks. The rain was stronger than I had thought. I grabbed my raincoat, stepped outside, and Buddy ran after me, his tail wagging lightly despite the rain soaking his fur. The horse barn stood behind the house, an old place with the smell of dry hay and wood in the air. I pushed open the door, flicking on Thedham hanging light, its yellow glow illuminating the stacked hay bales. Buddy followed slowly behind, water dripping from his fur onto the dirt floor. I checked the roof, seeing a few drops of water leaking through the cracks, but Mimmin wasn't focused. I could feel Buddy's gaze following my every step. I turned back and saw him standing in the middle empty of the path, his eyes bright and shimmering under the light like two small flames burning in the dark. I called softly, "Buddy, come here," but my voice trembled, as though I were inviting something far beyond my initial intentions. He walked toward me slowly, and when he stood in front of me, I felt his breath warm and steady, gently brushing my hand through the thin raincoat. I bent down to stroke his head, but my hand trembled as it touched his wet fur. Buddy looked up, his gaze locking onto mine, and at moment I felt like wasn't just a dog, but a soul that understood me more than anyone else. Then, like a wave finally breaking through thigh, and Buddy jumped up, placing his front paws on my shoulders. The weight of him pushed me back, forcing me to lean into the stack of dry hay behind me. I fell down onto the hay, its dry rustle beneath like a living carpet. Buddy stood above me, rainwater from his fur dripping onto my shirt like the sky, tears mixing with this moment. I shivered, my hands gripping his fur, feeling the strength and vitality in each muscle, like a mountain standing firm amidst the storm buddies. Breath brushed against my neck hat and hurried like the summer wind blowing through the fields. I leaned down my face, only inches from his, and Buddy licked my cheek, his warm tongue sliding across my skin like a soft brush stroking on a white canvas. I closed my eyes, letting that feeling wash over me like a river. Pulling into its depths, my hand tightened on his fur. Pulling him closer in, he nuzzled into my chest, his wet fur rubbing against my skin through the thin coat like a warm wave flowing over dry sin. I gasped, my mind spinning between guilt and a strange sense of fulfillment. Buddy whined softly, like a wordless whisper, and I felt his body merge with mine like two branches intertwined in storm. We shouldn't, I whispered, my voice dissolving into the sound of the rain outside, but I didn't push him away. I let my hand glide over his back, slowly like water flowing over stones, and Buddy responded by pressing harder, as if he wanted to merge with me completely that night in the horse barn filled with the scent of hay and rain. We let the fire of emotions burn, crossing boundaries I once thought were enviable. That closeness was wordless but intense, like a primal dance between me and the deepest instinct within in me. When everything settled down, I sat against the hay stack, rainwater dripping from the roof onto Miss Holder's like late tears. Buddy lay beside me, his wet fur pressed tightly against his body, his brown eyes looking at me with trust. I stroked his head, my heart filled with guilt, mixed with an odd sense of peace. I wondered what I had just done, and whether Caleb would ever understand if he knew. But deep in my heart, I knew that this moment had changed everything between Buddy and me forever. After that night in the horse barn, I felt like a field after the storm came on the outside, but full of cracks that couldn't be mended. Buddy stayed by me side, like always, his tail wagging at me, his brown eyes shining with unwavering trust. I stroked his fur every morning, the warmth from him spreading through my hand, but my heart felt heavy like a bundle of wet hay, full of guilt and an odd peace I couldn't admit. Itched to return to my routine on the farm. I fed the chickens, checked the cornfields, but each step seemed to lead me back to that moment when Buddy and I emerged together amidst the dry grass and the sound of rain. Caleb called, thick beating his voice steady over the speaker. "Phone be home tomorrow?" I replied with a lifeless yes, but when hung up, I wondered if he could see the change in my eyes, or if I would have to carry this secret alone forever. That night, Buddy jumped onto the bed beside me again. I let him stay my hand, gliding over his golden fur, whispering, "You didn't understand, Buddy." But when he looked up, his deep eyes like a still lake, I wondered if he really didn't understand, or if he was the only one who truly knew my heart in that moment. I couldn't sleep, my mind spinning between guilt and a bond I couldn't shake. Finally, I got up, put on my sweater, and stepped out into the cold of the Nebraska night. I walked to the horse barn where everything had changed. Fedham light still hung, casting a yellow glow on the horses, standing quietly in their stall. As I stopped before the door, looking into the dark eyes of duller dust, deep still, as if asking me where I would go from here, Buddy stood beside me, nuzzling my leg, but I didn't bend down. I just stood there, the cold wind blowing through my hair, wondering if that flame would burn forever in Sadim, or if one day it would lead me to a place I had never imagined.